close your eyes and picture a sea with no shore, no wind to touch it, no light to shape it, no time to move through it. This was Egypt before the first sunrise, only the deep, silent water of none. And yet, beneath that quiet, something was waking. Before we go any further, take a moment to get comfortable. If you enjoy these calm journeys through history and myth, you're always welcome to stay with us. And if you'd like, tell me where you're listening from tonight now. Let's drift back to the first dawn, to a world where gods walked beside mortals and the night sky was the body of a queen. In that first quiet, long before memory, before there was earth or sky, before breath learned to move or flame learned to burn, there was only water. Not water that shimmered beneath light or shifted with wind, but water without edges, without depth, without sound. It stretched in every direction, heavy and unmoving, an endless sea that neither rose nor fell. The water felt dense, as if even thought itself could not yet rise within it. No breeze touched its surface. No ripple disturbed its weight. Silence lay upon it like a deep pressure, complete and unbroken. Time had not yet learned how to move forward. Nothing carried a name, because nothing yet stood apart from anything else. The ancient Egyptians called this vast, formless, deep none, the primordial waters from which all things would one day emerge. Within this immense stillness, there was no light to cast shadows, and no darkness to resist it. Everything existed together, folded inward, unshaped and unseparated. Chaos did not roar or tear at itself here. It didn't need to. It simply existed, quiet, formless, and patient. Nin did not threaten destruction, nor did it promise creation. It waited not with intention, but with endless endurance. And within these boundless waters rested the first possibility, the idea that things could be otherwise, that stillness might one day take shape, that difference could emerge without violence. The Egyptians did not imagine creation as a sudden rupture or a forceful command spoken into the void. They imagined it as gentle rising, like land appearing after a flood, slow and deliberate, guided by something felt rather than seen. Even then, before form existed, there was tension. On one side was Isfet, the natural state of confusion, collapse and unmaking. On the other was Maat, not yet born but already present in potential, the principle of balance, truth and harmony. Maat was not order forced upon chaos from outside. It was order discovered within chaos itself, shaped carefully from what already was. In the depths of noon, Maat slept. There were no gods walking yet, no voices echoing across the waters, no eyes watching from above, and yet the universe was not empty. It was dense with possibility, weighted with everything that might one day come to be. Mountains, rivers, stars and souls all rested there together, unformed and indistinguishable, like a forest contained within a single seed. The Egyptians believed this moment never truly ended. None was not destroyed when creation began. It remained beneath the world, beneath the land and the sky, always present, always waiting. Chaos was never erased or defeated forever. It was held back, shaped, balanced, through care, attention and continual effort. Creation, then, was not a single event lost to time. It was an act that had to be renewed, remembered, and protected again and again. In this vision, the universe was fragile. Order was precious because it was never guaranteed. Every sunrise, every breath drawn into the lungs, every heartbeat depended on Maat continuing to outweigh Isfet. The world existed not because chaos had been defeated once long ago, but because balance was chosen repeatedly, without rest. And from the silence of noon, something began to stir. Not movement as it would later be understood, but awareness, a quiet recognition that stillness could be broken, that a first shape might rise, that existence could step forward from possibility into form. The waters did not resist. They parted slowly as if yielding to something they had always contained. This was the moment before the first dawn, before the first name was spoken. A pause suspended between nothing and everything, the held breath before creation. In later ages, priests would chant hymns and kings would raise temples to honor what followed. Artists would carve stone and trace symbols to preserve the memory of beginnings. Yet all of it would lead back to this silent sea, this timeless waiting, this dark and endless water beneath all things. Here, before gods ruled and mortals dreamed, the universe rested in quiet balance. And from that stillness, the story of Egypt began to rise, shaped by order, tested by chaos, and guided always by the fragile, enduring promise of Maat. From the waters of Nun, creation was ready to begin. From the quiet, unmoving waters of Nun, something new was believed to emerge. The Egyptians did not imagine creation as a single command spoken once into darkness. They believed it unfolded gradually, remembered in different ways across cities, temples, and generations. Each version was shaped by place, by tradition, by what people saw when they looked at the world around them. No story was meant to erase another. They existed together, like reflections on the surface of the same river, shifting with the light yet drawn from the same depth. Creation to them was too vast and too sacred to belong to only one telling. In one tradition, preserved in the city of Heliopolis, creation began with a solitary presence rising from the waters. Atum emerged alone, standing upon the first mound of dry land, the Benben, which lifted itself slowly from Nun. The ground was damp and newly formed, still bearing the memory of the waters beneath it. There was no sky above him yet, no earth spread wide beneath his feet, only the quiet certainty that existence had begun to take shape. Atum stood complete within himself, carrying both origin and ending, the seed of all that would follow. From Atum came motion, and from motion came light. He brought forth the first forces of the universe, air and moisture, and through them space began to open. Breath moved for the first time. Distance became possible. The sky lifted away from the earth, and the world found room to exist. Atum was often joined with Ra, the living sun, for light was understood not merely as brightness, but as life itself. Each sunrise was seen as a reminder that creation was not locked in the past. It was happening again, quietly, with every return of light after darkness. Yet elsewhere, in Memphis, the beginning was remembered differently. There, creation did not begin with land rising from water, but with thought. Ptah, the great craftsman god, shaped the universe through his mind and his voice. Before form existed, he conceived of all things, the gods, the land, the people, and the laws that would bind them together. In silence, he imagined them. When he spoke their names, they were believed to step into being. Speech was not sound alone, it was action. This was creation as intention rather than force. The world was not pushed into existence, but carefully designed. Words carried weight. Names held power. To speak correctly was to shape reality itself. In this vision, the universe was built like a temple, each element placed with care, each balance considered before the structure could stand. Thought came first, and from thought, order followed. Far to the south, in Hermopolis, the beginning was remembered as older still, heavier with mystery. Before any single god stood alone, there were 8, the Ogdoad, paired forces representing the deepest conditions of existence: darkness and hiddenness, stillness and infinity, moisture and obscurity. They did not rule, they did not command. They moved quietly beneath the surface of things like currents beneath deep water, stirring the waters of Nun until balance could begin to form. From their movement, an egg was said to rise, or, in other tellings, a lotus flower, lifting itself slowly toward the surface. When it opened, light spilled into darkness for the first time. The sun was born not as a conqueror, but as a result. Harmony had reached a point where light could exist. Chaos had not been erased. It had been held in balance. These stories did not contradict one another. To the Egyptians, they revealed something deeper. Creation was complex, layered, and continuous. No single moment could explain it fully. The universe could be spoken into being, shaped by thought, or born from equilibrium. All were true, because all reflected the same understanding, that order does not replace chaos, but rises carefully from within it. Creation, in this vision, was never finished. Each dawn repeated the first sunrise. Each flooding of the Nile echoed the rising of land from Nun. Temple rituals and spoken prayers were not performances. They were renewals, small, careful acts meant to keep harmony from thinning. Even the gods themselves were sustained by remembrance and repetition. To forget creation was to weaken it. To neglect it was to invite chaos back in. This was why Egypt held many beginnings instead of one. The land itself demanded it. Surrounded by desert and sustained by a river that could both nourish and destroy, Egypt could not believe in permanence. Balance had to be maintained, not assumed. Maat was not a gift to be accepted once and forgotten. It was a responsibility shared by gods, kings, and people alike. In every version of the beginning, one truth remained steady. Chaos came first, but it did not have the final word. From darkness came light. From silence came sound. From formless waters came a world shaped carefully enough to endure. As creation settled into rhythm, the universe began to organize itself. Forces took on identity. Relationships formed. Power found structure. The stage was set not only for the land and sky, but for those who would soon govern them. And so, as the first light spread across the waters and the land found its place between earth and heaven, the gods themselves began to take shape, emerging from creation as both its children and its guardians, ready to give form to the order that had so gently begun. As creation settled into balance, it did not remain distant or formless. The forces that had shaped the world began to press closer, taking shape as beings with voices, desires, and memory. To the Egyptians, the universe was not an empty mechanism. It was a family. Power alone did not hold it together. Kinship did. Order, once born, required guardians who could live within it. And so the gods emerged, formed from the very elements they governed, bound to the world rather than standing apart from it. In the earliest tellings, a strange quiet followed creation, as if the newly formed world paused to listen to itself. The waters stilled, the air waited. Then, slowly, identity began to gather. Not as a sudden chorus, but as individual presences stepping forward one by one, each claiming its place. At the center of this lineage stood Atum, the first to rise from the waters. From him came Shu, the breath of air, unseen, weightless, yet impossible to escape, and Tefnut, the force of moisture, gentle as mist and fierce as storm rain. Together they brought motion into stillness. Breath moved, damp earth darkened. The universe, once pressed into itself, began to open. When Shu lifted the sky and Tefnut nourished the land, structure took hold. Space appeared where none had existed. Boundaries formed, not as walls but as permissions. The world had room to become itself. From Shu and Tefnut were born Geb and Nut, earth and sky. Geb lay below, Heavy and fertile, his body the soil that cracked beneath the sun and softened under floodwaters. Nut arched above him, vast and luminous, her form stretched endlessly across the heavens. Each night she swallowed the sun, holding it within her darkness, and each morning she gave birth to it again. To watch the sunrise was to witness this act repeated, proof that endings were never final, only transformed. In the beginning, Geb and Nut were locked together, pressed so tightly that nothing could grow between them. Creation stalled. The world felt suffocated. It was Shu who forced himself between them, lifting Nut upward and pressing Geb downward. The act was painful, but necessary. Separation brought life. Space was not emptiness, it was possibility. Between earth and sky, the world finally learned how to breathe, and within that breathing space, the next generation emerged. From this union came Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. With their births, the divine began to feel closer to the human. They were siblings, bound by blood, yet shaped by rivalry, loyalty, and desire. Through them, creation learned tension. Harmony no longer existed alone. It was tested, strained, and reshaped. Osiris emerged first, calm, steady, associated with growth and renewal, his presence felt in the slow, dependable rhythm of life itself. Isis followed, wise and fiercely devoted, her power rooted not in strength of arm, but in knowledge, memory, and care. Set was born restless, tied to storms, deserts, and disruption, necessary movement that could so easily become destruction. Nephthys stood at the edges, quieter than the others, watching over mourning, protection, and the hidden moments between states of being. Together, they formed a divine family that mirrored the world below. Love existed alongside jealousy. Cooperation lived beside conflict. Order required effort, and effort invited resistance. These gods did not float above creation, untouched. They were woven into it, acting out the same struggles found in weather, in land, and in human hearts. The Egyptians often depicted their gods with the heads of animals, not to make them monstrous, but to make them understandable. A falcon's unblinking gaze, a jackal's watchfulness at the edge of the desert, a lioness's contained fury. These were not ornaments, they were truths given form. Animals expressed qualities humans felt but struggled to name. By blending human bodies with animal heads, the gods became bridges, linking instinct and thought, nature and meaning. Every god reflected a force already alive in the world. Air moved because Shu breathed. Rain fell because Tefnut wept. Crops rose from the soil because Osiris endured. Storms shattered calm because Set stirred. The gods were not distant creators who finished their work and withdrew. They were the work itself, alive within the rhythms of existence, sustaining and testing the balance they had helped shape. This growing structure became known as the Ennead, the great divine family of 9. It was not merely a list of names, but a map of reality. Each generation flowed from the one before it. Each relationship explained how the universe held together. Authority passed through lineage. Stability depended on connection. Yet power was never absolute. Even the greatest gods answered to Maat. Truth and balance stood above all, shaping action and consequence alike. When gods acted in harmony with Maat, the world flourished. When they strayed, imbalance followed, and suffering crept in. Through these divine relationships, the Egyptians understood themselves. Families argued and reconciled. Leaders ruled and were challenged. Life grew, failed, and renewed itself. The gods did not erase uncertainty from existence. They gave it meaning. As the divine family settled into its roles, the world appeared ordered and whole. But beneath that calm lay tensions that could tighten and snap. Love could sour into envy. Authority could be questioned. Chaos had not vanished. It waited, quiet and alert, for a moment of weakness. And soon, within this divine household, that moment would come. A single act of betrayal would fracture what had been held together, setting into motion the most enduring story of loss, death, and renewal Egypt would ever tell. In the age when the gods were said to walk openly upon the land, Egypt was ruled by Osiris, not as a conqueror who crushed enemies beneath his feet, but as a king whose presence changed the way the land itself behaved. Where Osiris ruled, the earth responded. The soil grew dark and rich beneath the floodwaters. Crops rose steadily instead of struggling. Life did not feel hurried or fearful. It followed a rhythm people could trust. Osiris was remembered as a king who taught rather than commanded. Under his rule, people learned when to plant and when to wait, when to speak, and when silence preserved harmony. Laws were shaped to favor fairness over dominance, balance over cruelty. Order did not arrive through threat or punishment. It settled slowly like the Nile spreading across its banks, inevitable and sustaining. To live under Osiris was not to feel controlled. It was to feel held. He embodied Maat not as an idea spoken by priests, but as something visible in daily life. His authority felt steady, almost quiet, yet impossible to ignore. Abundance followed him, not excess but sufficiency. Beside him stood Isis, his sister, his queen, and his equal, whose wisdom tempered his calm strength. Where Osiris provided structure, Isis provided understanding. Together they ruled not as a hierarchy but as a partnership, mirroring the balance they brought to the land itself. Yet even in this age of harmony, not every heart found peace. Set, brother to Osiris, looked upon this ordered world and felt unease instead of reassurance. He was a god shaped by storms, deserts, by places where survival was uncertain and strength meant endurance. To Set, movement was life, change was necessity. In Osiris's Egypt, he did not see balance. He saw boundaries. He saw limits placed upon a force that had never learned to stand still. Where others felt safety, Set felt confinement. Egypt's calm order pressed against him like a closed wall. Over time, resentment took root. Jealousy did not arrive all at once. It grew quietly, fed by comparison and silence. Osiris was loved without effort. Isis was respected without question. And Set, restless and powerful, found no place where his nature felt welcome. What began as unease hardened into bitterness. What remained unspoken grew dangerous. Set did not challenge Osiris openly. The stories say he waited. He watched the court. He measured his brother's trust. Bitterness settled into patience, and patience sharpened into intent. In secret, Set devised a plan that relied not on strength, but precision. He had a chest crafted, its measurements exact, its surface polished smooth. It was beautiful to look upon, adorned as if meant for honor rather than harm. Every detail was chosen carefully, for betrayal works best when it wears the face of celebration. At a great gathering of the gods, Set presented the chest as a gift. He declared that it would belong to whoever fit it perfectly. One by one, others lay inside and failed. Laughter followed. Curiosity grew. When Osiris stepped forward and lay within it, the fit was exact. Before surprise could turn into understanding, the lid was sealed. Without warning, without ritual, the chest was carried away and cast into the river. The Nile accepted it without resistance. The stories say the land fell silent. Osiris was not simply trapped. He was removed, taken from the living world and from the order he had carefully nurtured. The river carried his body far from Egypt, beyond familiar shores and remembered boundaries. In his absence, balance wavered. Rituals felt uncertain. The rhythms people trusted faltered. It was said the land itself mourned, as if something essential had been torn away. Isis did not rest. She followed the river's winding path, moving through borders and wild places, calling Osiris's name into wind and water. Grief didn't weaken her. It sharpened her resolve. When at last she found the chest and brought it home, Set's fury reignited. Determined to ensure Osiris could never return, he tore the body apart, scattering its pieces across the land. This act was remembered as more than murder. It was an attempt to erase order itself. Each fragment was believed to fall upon Egypt like a wound. What had once been unified fractured. Justice lost its anchor. The harmony between gods and mortals thinned, and chaos, long restrained, began to seep back into the world. Yet Isis did not surrender to despair. With patience born of devotion, she searched again. She travelled the length of Egypt, gathering what had been scattered. Where she found a fragment, she performed sacred rites, cleansing and sanctifying the land. Each act restored something that had been broken, binding Osiris once more to the world, even as his form changed. Through her magic and care, Osiris was made whole again, not as he had been, but as something transformed. He could not return to rule the living. His time upon the earth had ended, but in Egyptian belief death was never final. It was a passage. Osiris descended into the Duat, the realm beyond life, where he became Lord of the Dead. There he ruled with the same fairness he had shown in life, judging souls and preserving balance beyond the visible world. In this transformation, injustice was not undone, but answered. Order did not break. It adapted. Maat endured. Set's victory proved hollow. Though he shattered Osiris's body, he could not destroy his influence. Life continued to rise from the land, renewed through Osiris's presence beneath it. Even death gained meaning, shaped into part of the eternal order. Still, Egypt did not return immediately to peace. The wound of betrayal remained open. Osiris's absence lingered in broken oaths and unsettled hearts. The land waited, suspended between what had been lost and what might yet be restored. From this loss, a fragile and powerful hope emerged, the belief that order could return, not by denying chaos, but by facing it, that justice, though delayed, could still be claimed. And within Isis grew another promise, a child born not of peace, but of perseverance, one who would rise to challenge Set and restore balance to the world above. From the broken body of the first king, a new struggle began, one that would shape the destiny of gods and mortals alike, and test whether Maat could truly endure in a world forever touched by chaos. In the quiet that followed Osiris's fall, the world did not collapse, but it wavered. It was as if the land itself hesitated, unsure of the rhythm it had followed for so long. Fields still lay beneath the sun, the river still moved, yet something essential felt unsettled. Order had not vanished, but it no longer stood without resistance. At the heart of this fragile pause stood Isis. She'd already done what no other god or mortal had dared. She'd crossed the boundary of death, gathered what had been torn apart, and spoken words older than the crowns of kings. Through her devotion, Osiris had been restored, not to the soil of Egypt, not to the throne he once held, but to a deeper and more enduring role beyond the world of breath. Osiris lived again, transformed. His resurrection was not a return to daylight, but a passage inward. He became ruler of the Duat, the hidden realm through which every soul must one day travel. In death, Osiris gained an authority greater than any earthly crown, the power to judge truth, to weigh the heart, and to preserve balance where life could no longer reach. Through him, death ceased to be chaos, It became structure. It became order of another kind. From this act of devotion came a final and fragile miracle. Isis conceived a child, not in a time of peace, but in the shadow of danger. Set's rage had not cooled. His jealousy still moved like a storm-gathering strength. Knowing this, Isis fled from the open land into the marshes of the delta, where reeds grew thick and water hid more than it revealed. Mud clung to her feet. Insects buzzed in the heat. Silence pressed close. There, far from thrones and temples, Horus was born. His arrival was quiet, almost cautious, as though the world itself feared to announce him. No celebration marked his birth. No divine trumpet sounded. Only the slow movement of water and the whisper of reeds bore witness, and that secrecy saved him. Isis became more than a queen in those hidden years. She became a guardian. She shielded Horus from scorpions that crept through the marsh grass, from sickness that rose with stagnant air, from unseen dangers that moved at night. Her magic was not loud or violent. It was constant. It lived in whispered names, in protective gestures, in prayers spoken again and again until they shaped reality itself. She called upon the gods. She called upon the stars. She called upon Maat, not as an idea, but as a living force that could still protect what was fragile. And Horus lived. He grew beneath watchful eyes, shaped by a loss he did not remember, and a destiny he did not yet understand. He learned to stand, to see, to endure. In him lived the unanswered injustice of Osiris's fall and the quiet promise that order could return. Through Horus, kingship found a future. When Horus came of age, hiding was no longer possible. The time for silence ended. He stepped forward to claim what had been taken, not only his father's throne, but the balance of the world itself. Set did not yield. He never would have. What followed was not a single battle fought in one place, but a long and bitter struggle marked by trials, contests, and judgment. Their conflict rippled outward, mirrored in storms that tore across the land, in eclipses that darkened the sky, in winds that refused to settle. Horus and Set did not fight as simple rivals. They fought as forces. Horus stood for rightful order, kingship rooted in continuity, justice, and restraint. Set embodied disruption, strength without limit, power driven by desire rather than duty. Neither could erase the other. Their struggle echoed the world itself, where chaos and order could not exist alone, yet could never fully reconcile. At times, Horus was wounded. In one violent trial, Set tore Horus's eye from him. Pain followed. Darkness followed. This loss was not merely physical. It marked the cost of restoring balance in a world already scarred. Order, once broken, demanded sacrifice. Yet even this wound did not remain an ending. Through care, patience, and restoration, the Eye of Horus was healed, becoming a symbol of protection, wholeness, and renewal, a reminder that loss could be answered without becoming permanent. The gods grew weary of endless conflict. A divine court was convened, not a battlefield, but a place of judgment. The highest powers presided. Witnesses spoke. Deeds were recalled. The past was examined not through strength, but through truth. Lineage was considered. Justice was weighed. From beyond life, Osiris spoke. His voice carried the authority of one who had ruled, suffered, and endured transformation. Through him, the gods remembered what had been destroyed, and what still deserved restoration. The judgment was made. Horus was named rightful king. Set was not destroyed. Chaos could not be erased without unraveling the world itself. Instead, his power was confined, bound, restrained. Order did not triumph through annihilation, but through judgment. Maat was restored not by denying Isfet, but by placing it within its limits. Horus ascended the throne as the living embodiment of divine kingship. Through him, the boundary between gods and mortals grew thinner. Every future pharaoh would claim his authority, not as personal power, but as responsibility entrusted by the gods themselves. The Eye of Horus endured as a warning and a promise. Loss could be healed, balance could return. But order was never permanent. It required vigilance. It demanded care, just as Isis had once guarded her child in silence and shadow. With Horus's victory, the world steadied. The sun rose without hesitation. The river returned to its rhythm. Life moved forward again, shaped by the lesson that justice may be delayed, but it must always be pursued. And, above it all, Ra continued his eternal journey, carrying light across the sky, reminding gods and mortals alike that every ending carries the possibility of return, and that balance, once restored, must never be taken for granted. Above the restored order of the world, the sun continued its path, steady, unhurried, and unavoidable. Ra, the ancient creator and living light, didn't rule from a distant throne or command the world through stillness. He moved. Each day he rose from the eastern horizon, not as a symbol alone, but as a presence that could be felt. Warmth spread across stone and soil. Shadows shifted. Birds stirred. Crops slowly turned their faces toward the light, and rivers caught the sun upon their surface, breaking it into trembling fragments. Life responded instinctively to his passage. To the Egyptians, this movement mattered deeply. Motion was proof of life. Stillness belonged to decay and chaos. As long as Ra moved, the world was alive. As long as the sun travelled its path, existence remained held together. Ra was more than a god who had created the world in a distant beginning. He was creation in motion, renewed with every sunrise. His light was never assumed to be permanent. It could weaken. It could fail. That was why it mattered. Each dawn was not a simple repetition, but a recovery. Light reclaimed from the edge of disappearance. The sun's return reassured the world that order, though fragile, had survived another night. At dawn, Ra boarded the solar bark, the sacred vessel that carried him across the sky. The boat did not glide upon water, but along the unseen currents of time itself. Its movement shaped the hours. Labour began beneath it. Rest followed its decline. Reflection gathered as it drifted westward. The passing of the sun divided the day into moments that could be lived within. Ra did not travel alone. Other gods accompanied him, guardians, watchers and defenders, each bound to the journey by responsibility rather than choice. Some held the course steady. Some scanned the darkness ahead. Some stood armed at the prow, facing dangers that could not yet be seen. Together they sustained the rhythm of the cosmos, knowing that vigilance was part of survival. As Ra crossed the heavens, the world below settled into visible order. Fields were worked, disputes were judged, promises were made and kept. This daily passage was not merely a way to measure time. It was evidence that Maat still ruled. As long as the sun rose, balance endured. Should the sun ever fail to return, the world would not simply grow dark, it would come undone. But the journey didn't end with sunset. As the sun slipped beneath the western horizon, Ra descended into the Duat, the shadowed realm beneath the world. His light dimmed, but it did not vanish. Night was not emptiness. It was a crossing, a dangerous passage where sight failed and order could no longer rely on brightness alone. The Duat was not a single place, but a shifting terrain. Rivers flowed against expectation. Gates appeared only to disappear moments later. Guardians demanded names, memory, and truth before allowing passage. Knowledge mattered here. Forgetfulness was perilous. This realm tested not only the dead, but the sun itself. Souls moved through it guided by spells and remembrance, mirroring Ra's own passage through uncertainty. At its heart lay the domain of Osiris, where death was not chaos but structure. Each night Ra faced his greatest enemy, Apophis, the serpent of unmaking. Apophis was not a god of temples or prayer. He was older than worship, older even than many of the gods who opposed him. He did not seek to rule. He sought absence. Coiled within the darkness, he waited for the solar bark, rising again and again in endless attempts to swallow the light and drag creation back into the silent waters of none. The struggle between Ra and Apophis was never final. Each night they clashed in shadow and confusion. Apophis attacked not only with force but with disorientation, twisting paths, blinding vision, threatening to halt the bark's progress. Ra could not destroy him. Apophis could not prevail. Instead, the conflict repeated, night after night, a reminder that chaos was eternal and that endurance, not final victory, sustained the world. The gods who travelled with Ra fought beside him. Ancient spells were spoken, words shaped to bind and repel. Blades of light flashed in the dark. Even Set, restrained yet necessary, was sometimes counted among the defenders, standing against a deeper chaos he could never fully embody. Order held firm not through overwhelming power, but through persistence, cooperation, and restraint. By dawn, Apophis was defeated once more. Ra emerged from the Duat renewed, rising again in the east. His return was not automatic. It was earned. The light that spread across the land carried proof that life could continue, that darkness had not claimed the final word. Each sunrise was a victory carried forward from the struggle of the night before. This cycle shaped how the Egyptians understood existence. Life moved forward because the sun did. Death was not a fall into nothingness, but a journey through the Duat, mirroring Ra's own passage. Renewal followed endurance. Light followed darkness, not because chaos disappeared, but because it had been held back. As time passed, Ra himself aged within myth. His strength shifted, his light softened. Power was shared with younger gods, yet even in weakness, his role remained essential. Gods rose and fell, kings ruled and died, dynasties vanished beneath sand and memory. Still, the solar journey endured, steady, repeated, unbroken. Every morning reaffirmed the world's balance, every night tested it. This rhythm comforted those who watched the sky. It taught that struggle was not failure, and darkness was not defeat. It was part of the pattern. To exist was to move between light and shadow, guided not by certainty, but by balance. As Ra continued his endless voyage above, the gods below turned their attention toward mortal lives, to homes warmed by sunrise, to families gathered at dusk, to quiet decisions made far from temples and battlefields. For while the sun governed the heavens, Maat was upheld on earth not by cosmic wars alone, but by daily choices made in light and shadow alike. There came a time when humanity forgot its place. In the earliest ages, when the gods still walked close to the world and the memory of creation had not yet faded, humans were expected to live within Maat. Truth, restraint, and balance were not ideas reserved for temples or priests. They were obligations woven into daily life. To exist was to participate in harmony. As long as that harmony was respected, the land flourished. But order weakens when it's treated as permanent. As generations passed, memory softened, reverence faded into habit. People spoke carelessly and acted without measure, believing the world would endure no matter how they lived. Some went further still, turning their thoughts against Ra himself and questioning the authority of the sun god who had shaped the world and sustained it through his endless journey across the sky. Ra was ancient by then, He had grown old with the world, his strength steady but no longer unquestioned. From his place in the heavens he watched humanity drift, not into open rebellion, but into forgetfulness. They no longer remembered that existence itself was conditional, or that beyond the edges of the ordered land, chaos waited patiently, silent and close. Ra did not respond with immediate destruction. Instead, he summoned counsel. The gods gathered to weigh the fate of humankind. Shu and Tefnut stood witness. Geb and Nut listened in heavy silence. Thoth measured possibilities with careful thought, recording what must be considered rather than what was desired. Even Isis, whose power was rooted in preservation and care, observed with unease. The question before them was not whether humanity had failed, it was whether they should be allowed to continue. Ra chose judgment. From his own eye, the living instrument of divine will, he sent forth not correction, but consequence. The eye of Ra descended to the world, taking form as Sekhmet, the lioness goddess. She was not born in that moment, she had always existed, waiting beneath the surface of divine power. Now she was unleashed. Sekhmet was wrath given shape. Her name meant the powerful one, and power flowed through her without restraint. She was heat and flame, the sun at its most merciless. Where Ra illuminated and sustained, Sekhmet burned and destroyed. She did not argue. She did not hesitate. She descended upon the world with terrifying purpose. The stories say she moved like a storm across the land. Her roar rolled through valleys. Her breath scorched the air. She hunted those who had defied Maat, striking without mercy or delay. Fields were crushed beneath her passage. Cities emptied as people fled or fell. Even the land itself seemed to recoil beneath her steps. Blood soaked the earth. From above, the sun reflected the violence below. As Sekhmet carried out Ra's judgment, the light of the world was said to turn red, stained by what unfolded beneath it. This was not chaos acting blindly. It was punishment, exact and absolute. But judgment, once unleashed, does not always know when to stop. Sekhmet no longer distinguished between the guilty and those who simply remained alive. Her fury fed itself. Each act of destruction strengthened her. What had begun as correction grew into something more dangerous, and annihilation loomed. Ra watched in growing alarm. He had intended to remind humanity of balance, not erase them entirely. Creation was meant to endure. Chaos was never meant to prevail. Yet now, through his own command, the world teetered at the edge of unmaking. The gods saw it as well. Sekhmet's bloodlust no longer served its purpose. She raged not only against humanity but against existence itself. What was meant to restore Maat now threatened to consume it, and order began to collapse under excess. Ra acted again, but force could not undo force. Sekhmet could not be commanded to stop. Once unleashed, wrath obeyed only its own momentum. To confront her directly would invite catastrophe. So Ra chose deception, not as weakness, but as wisdom. He ordered vast quantities of beer to be brewed and mixed with red ochre, colouring it to resemble blood. The liquid was poured across the land in great pools, glistening beneath the sun like rivers of slaughter. As Sekhmet roamed, she saw the red flood, and believed her work unfinished. She drank deeply, consumed by her hunger for destruction. But the liquid was not blood. It was beer. Slowly her fury dulled. The intoxicating flood weakened her strength. Her vision blurred. Her steps grew unsteady. The fire that had driven her cooled, and where rage had ruled, exhaustion followed. At last, Sekhmet collapsed. When she awoke, the lioness of destruction was transformed. The fury that had nearly ended the world receded, revealing another face of divine power. Sekhmet became Hathor, goddess of joy, love, music, and renewal. The same force that had destroyed now nurtured, the same power that had punished now healed. This was not a contradiction. To the Egyptians, it was truth. Destruction and compassion were not opposites. They were expressions of the same power, divided only by balance. Power without restraint became devastation. Power guided by Maat became life. Humanity was spared, but the lesson endured. The destruction of mankind was remembered not as a tale of divine rage, but as a warning. That order could not survive neglect, that gods, like humans, could overstep, and that even justice required restraint. Ra did not emerge victorious. He emerged humbled. In some tellings, Ra withdrew further from the world after this event. Weary and disillusioned, he placed greater responsibility upon other gods and upon humanity itself. The maintenance of Maat could no longer rest on divine authority alone. It had to be shared. Sekhmet remained. She did not vanish when the blood dried. She endured as both protector and destroyer. In times of plague and war, she was feared. In times of healing, she was invoked as a divine physician. Temples honored her not only to appease her wrath, but to seek her protection. She embodied a dangerous truth. Order enforced without restraint becomes chaos, and mercy without limits invites decay. Balance lived not in extremes, but in awareness. Festivals were held in her, honor reenacting the moment she was calmed. Beer was consumed not as indulgence, but as ritual memory, a reminder of the choice that saved the world. Through Sekhmet, the Egyptians understood something unsettling, that the gods themselves were bound by Maat. Even Ra could err. Even divine justice required correction. Creation survived not because punishment was absolute, but because restraint returned. The sun rose again after the red days passed. Fields were replanted, cities rebuilt, and life continued, altered but enduring. Humanity moved forward with the knowledge that existence was conditional, and survival depended not on power, but on balance. Sekhmet watched from the edge of order, neither asleep nor distant. She remained as a warning of what followed when harmony was forgotten, and of how thin the line truly was between protection and destruction. She was worshipped not out of love alone, but out of understanding. Power demanded respect. When the sun shone gently, she was known as Hathor, bringing music, joy, and renewal into the world. In times of sickness, drought, or war, the lioness stirred again, reminding gods and mortals alike that balance could never be ignored. Both faces were real, and both were necessary. And so the story of the Red Sun endured, not as a myth meant to terrify, but as a lesson carried quietly through belief and ritual. Maat had to be guarded, power had to be restrained, and even the gods were required to choose balance, not once, but endlessly, if the world was to continue. While Ra travelled the sky and the great god shaped the fate of the cosmos, divine presence was never felt as distant. For the people of Egypt, the gods were not confined to towering temples or to stories told only of a forgotten past. They were believed to live close, near the hearth where meals were cooked, the marketplace where voices overlapped, and the riverbank where water touched soil. The divine was not something far above daily life. It moved through it. At dawn, a household stirred. A small oil lamp flickered awake, pushing back the last shadows of night. Bread was prepared with practiced hands, its warmth filling the room. A brief prayer was spoken, not loudly, not formally, but with familiarity, as one might speak to a presence already known. In moments like these, the gods were believed to listen, not from a distance, but from nearby. Anubis stood watch, where life met death. He was the guardian of thresholds, the guide who walked beside souls when the familiar world fell away. Often depicted with the head of a jackal, Anubis reflected the animals seen near the edges of the desert, where tombs rested beneath the sand and silence lingered. His presence was remembered as calm and steady, never hurried, never cruel. To die was not to be abandoned. Anubis ensured that each soul found its path, protected from confusion, fear, and forgetting. In the preparation of the dead, his care was deeply felt. Hands wrapped bodies slowly, layer by layer, guided by rituals believed to mirror Anubis's own actions. Oils were applied, amulets placed, words spoken with care. Through him, death became an extension of life's order, not its negation, a passage watched over, not a fall into darkness. Thoth moved through the world in a quieter way. He was the keeper of wisdom, the recorder of events, the one who measured and balanced. With the head of an ibis or a baboon, animals known for watchfulness and patience, Thoth embodied thought itself. Writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law were placed under his care, not as tools of domination, but as instruments meant to keep things aligned. When agreements were made, Thoth was believed to stand unseen, ensuring fairness. When disputes arose, his presence promised resolution through truth rather than force. He recorded the outcomes of divine judgments and weighed the hearts of the dead alongside Osiris. Knowledge, in this world, was not cold or distant. It was sacred, living, and woven into every act that sought harmony. Hathor brought warmth into daily life. She was love, joy, music, and beauty, heard in laughter, felt in song, carried in gentle celebration. Her presence softened the weight of existence, reminding people that harmony was not found only in restraint, but also in joy freely shared. She watched over mothers and children, musicians and travellers, offering comfort in sorrow and delight in peace. Hathor was also a goddess of transition. She greeted souls as they entered the afterlife, welcoming them not with judgment, but with compassion. Her power lay in connection, between people, between moments, between life and what followed. In her, emotion itself was understood as something sacred rather than dangerous. Bastet guarded the home. Often shown as a cat or a woman with a feline face, she embodied protection, gentleness, and quiet strength. Cats moved easily between stillness and sudden action, alert yet serene. In Bastet, this balance found meaning. She was believed to shield families from illness, misfortune, and unseen threats, standing as a silent sentinel within domestic life. Homes honoured her with small offerings placed without ceremony. A dish of food, a quiet word, a simple gesture of trust. Her presence reminded people that order did not begin in palaces or grand temples, but in the spaces where people slept, ate, argued, reconciled, and gathered at the end of the day. These gods were not distant rulers issuing commands from the sky. They were companions, their stories intertwined with daily experience, making the divine familiar and approachable. A successful harvest, a safe birth, a fair judgment, all were felt as signs that the gods remained close, attentive to ordinary lives. This closeness shaped how Egyptians understood their place in the universe. Life was not a solitary journey. It unfolded within a living network of forces that watched, guided, and responded. Rituals were not empty gestures, but quiet conversations. Offerings were acts of gratitude, not obligation. In this world, every action mattered. Balance was maintained through attention, restraint, and care. The gods did not demand perfection, only participation. And as people moved through life with this quiet assurance, they prepared for what lay beyond it. For death, like life, was not a separation from the gods, but another path guided by them, leading onward into a journey that promised continuation, memory and presence rather than silence. For the people of ancient Egypt, death was not a closing door. It was a threshold, a narrow crossing between one form of existence and another. Life was understood to flow onward like the Nile itself, changing shape as it moved, sometimes calm, sometimes hidden, but never truly ending. What mattered was not simply whether existence continued, but how it continued, and whether the harmony of Maat would remain intact beyond the final breath, beyond the reach of the living voice. A human being, in Egyptian understanding, was never a single fragile thing. A person was made of parts that intertwined, parts that could separate at death and be gathered again with care. The Ka was the life force. It lingered close to what it had known, drawn toward familiar places. It was sustained by offerings, food, drink, and remembrance placed by living hands. The Ba carried recognition and personality. It could move between worlds, leaving the tomb and returning again. Night after night it was believed to reunite with the preserved body, so the person would not become lost. When Ka and Ba were guarded properly, purified through ritual, protected by words and symbols, they could become the Ak, a spirit made lasting, radiant, and whole. Death, then, was not a moment, it was a process. After the final breath faded and the body fell still, the soul began its journey into the Duat, the vast and shifting realm beneath the earth. This was not a place of punishment by default, nor a peaceful paradise granted without question. It was a landscape of contradiction and testing, rivers that flowed strangely, deserts that stretched without horizon, gates that opened only when properly addressed. Knowledge mattered here as much as virtue. A soul moved carefully through this realm, guided by memory and protected by words learned in life. Spells, prayers, and sacred declarations were gathered into what later generations would call the Book of the Dead. Not a single book, but a living body of texts rewritten, expanded, and adapted across centuries. These words were not commands shouted at the gods. They were affirmations of identity, reminders of balance, statements of worth. To know the correct names of gates, guardians, and paths was to pass safely. Forgetfulness invited danger. Knowledge preserved order. Throughout the Duat, the soul encountered watchers and judges, beings who tested not strength, but truth. At each threshold, the dead were required to declare who they were and how they had lived. This journey demanded honesty and self-awareness. One could not lie successfully beyond life. Memory itself became a form of judgment. At the heart of this passage lay the final reckoning. The soul was brought before Osiris, the once living king who now ruled beyond death. He did not sit as a tyrant or executioner, but as a figure of calm authority, shaped by suffering and transformation. Around him stood 42 divine assessors, each embodying a principle of moral order. Together they formed a court not of punishment, but of balance. Before Osiris stood the scales. On one side lay the heart, the seat of memory, intention, and truth. The Egyptians did not remove the heart during mummification, for it was essential. It carried the record of a life fully lived. On the other side rested the feather of Maat, light, exact, and unyielding. The heart was not examined for perfection. It was weighed for balance. The soul spoke a series of declarations, later known as the negative confession, not claiming innocence, but alignment. I have not stolen, I have not caused suffering, I have not disrupted harmony. These words were not boasts, they were affirmations of participation in Maat, spoken aloud in the presence of eternity. If the heart was heavy with cruelty, deceit, or disregard for balance, it could not pass. Waiting beside the scales was Amit, the devourer. Part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, a being formed from the most feared creatures known to Egypt. Ammit did not torture, she did not judge, she ended. A heart unbalanced by injustice was consumed, and the soul was dissolved back into chaos, losing the chance for continuation. This was not eternal punishment, but erasure, a return to the formless state that Maat forever resisted. But if the heart balanced with the feather, the soul was welcomed onward. It entered the field of reeds, a perfected reflection of the earthly world. There the river flowed gently without flood or drought. Crops grew without struggle. Work continued but without exhaustion. Loved ones gathered again, unchanged by time. Life went on, familiar, peaceful, and whole. This vision of the afterlife shaped every aspect of Egyptian living. Moral behavior was not enforced by fear alone, but by hope. Kindness, honesty, restraint, and generosity were not abstract virtues. They were preparations for eternity. To live well was to secure one's future beyond death. The body itself mattered deeply in this process. Mummification was not an act of vanity or denial. It was preservation for reunion. The bar needed a place to return, a recognizable form through which the soul could remain complete. Organs were removed with care and placed in sacred vessels. The body was wrapped slowly, deliberately, layer by layer, accompanied by prayers, oils, and symbols meant to guard against decay and forgetting. Amulets were placed among the wrappings, eyes for protection, scarabs for rebirth, symbols of stability and renewal. Each object carried intention. Nothing was accidental. Tombs were built as houses for eternity. Walls were painted with scenes of daily life. Farming, feasting, family gatherings. Not to cling to the past, but to carry it forward. Tools, food, and images were placed beside the dead, ensuring that nothing essential was missing. Even words carved into stone were believed to continue speaking, sustaining identity across time. Death, in this understanding, demanded patience, attention, and care. It was the final responsibility of the living toward those they loved. Through Osiris's judgment, death gained structure. Through Maat, it gained fairness. Through ritual, it gained meaning. As generations passed, this belief endured, shaping kings and farmers alike. Life was precious because it echoed beyond itself. Choices mattered because they were remembered, not only by the gods but by the heart itself. And so, even as bodies were laid to rest and names were spoken for the last time, the Egyptians did not imagine silence waiting beyond the tomb. They imagined continuation, a life shaped by harmony, guided by justice, and illuminated by the same order that governed the rising sun. From this sacred passage between worlds, another truth quietly emerged, that rulers too would one day stand before Osiris, and that power on earth was only meaningful when aligned with eternity. In Egypt, kingship was never a simple matter of rule. To govern the land was not merely to command armies or collect tribute, it was to step into a role believed to exist before any single man was born, a role shaped by myth, ritual, and responsibility. To rule was to participate in the divine order itself. The pharaoh was not understood as a ruler chosen by the gods alone. He was believed to be the living presence of Horus upon the earth, divine authority given human form. Through him, the balance restored by the gods was meant to move outward into the world of mortals, touching fields, courts, homes, and temples alike. This belief did not place the pharaoh above Maat. It bound him to it. As Horus had once restored order after chaos, so each pharaoh was expected to preserve harmony through justice, ritual, and restraint. His power was sacred, but it was never absolute. It existed only so long as it served balance. When a king ruled wisely, the land prospered, floods arrived, on time, crops grew, and the gods were believed to remain near. When he failed, imbalance spread quietly at first, then openly. Misfortune followed. The gods' favour was thought to withdraw, not in anger, but in warning. Divine legitimacy gave strength to this system, but it also placed limits upon it. A pharaoh's right to rule did not rest solely on conquest or bloodline. It rested on alignment with cosmic order. Coronation rituals reenacted the triumph of Horus over Set, reminding all present that kingship was born from restored balance, not brute force. Crowns were placed with deliberate care. Sacred names were spoken aloud, each syllable believed to carry weight. In these moments, authority was not seized, it was entrusted. Mythology was not distant storytelling, it was the foundation of authority. Laws echoed divine judgment. Court rituals mirrored the weighing of the heart before Osiris. Even the rhythm of labour and rest followed patterns shaped by the sun's journey and the river's flood. Through these daily repetitions, the pharaoh maintained Maat not only in temples, but in fields, workshops and households, wherever order could either be preserved or quietly lost. Temples rose across the land as meeting places between gods and people. They were not houses of silence, but centers of constant activity. At dawn, priests washed, dressed, and presented offerings to sacred images. Incense thickened the air. Hymns were spoken with measured precision. These acts were not displays meant for crowds, but careful maintenance. Nourishment believed to sustain the gods, and through them, the nation itself. Festivals carried these beliefs into the open air. Statues of gods were lifted from shadowed sanctuaries and carried through streets and along the riverbanks. Music echoed between stone walls. Bright fabrics flashed beneath the sun. For a brief time, the sacred stepped into public life. Divine order felt close enough to hear, to touch, to celebrate. In these moments, the pharaoh stood at the center, mediator, guardian, and servant of the gods. His role was not to dominate, but to connect. Through him, heaven and earth acknowledged one another. Myth gave meaning to power, and power reinforced myth. This exchange was delicate. If neglected, chaos could return without warning. For this reason, rituals were repeated with care. Words were spoken precisely. Gestures followed ancient patterns without deviation. Order survived not through force but through attention. Yet even as pharaohs were called gods, they remained mortal. They aged, they weakened, they died. In death, a pharaoh became Osiris, joining the eternal cycle that awaited all. His successor rose as Horus, renewing the promise of balance once more. Life moved forward through repetition, not permanence. This rhythm of life, death, and renewal shaped Egypt for centuries. Kings rose and fell, dynasties shifted, cities flourished and faded, yet the belief endured. Power was meaningful only when it served Maat. Authority existed to maintain harmony, not to escape it. Through this union of myth and rule, Egypt found stability in a fragile world. And yet, even with gods enthroned and rituals performed, the ancient enemy never vanished. Beyond palace walls and temple doors, chaos still listened, patient, quiet, and close, waiting for the moment when order might weaken and the world would once again be tested. Though balance had been restored, no one in Egypt believed it was ever safe. Order was not something the world possessed by default. It survived because it was cared for. It endured because harmony was chosen again and again, through attention, restraint, and daily effort. Beyond the narrow green strip of the river valley, the desert waited in silence, dry, shifting, unforgiving. Beyond the certainty of morning, night always returned, and beneath every settled thing, beneath every rule and ritual, the old possibility of unmaking remained. Quiet, patient, never far away, Set carried this restlessness within the divine world itself. He was not understood as a simple villain. To the Egyptian mind, Set was disruption made visible. The wind that snaps a sail, the sand that erases a path, the strength that refuses to bend simply because bending is expected. Even after Horus was declared rightful king, Set did not vanish. He remained, lingering at the edge of order, a reminder that conflict does not always come from outside. Sometimes it rises from within the household itself. Stability, they believed, was often tested by what felt familiar, not foreign. Yet deeper than Set was a danger that could not be reasoned with. Apophis, the great serpent, did not desire rule or recognition. He wanted absence. He wanted light to fail, paths to break, the shaped world to loosen and slip back toward the first dark waters of none. Each night when Ra descended into the Duat, Apophis was believed to rise again, coiling through shadow, stretching through uncertainty, seeking to halt the solar bark and silence the coming dawn. This struggle had no final ending. The sun's return each morning did not mean the threat was gone. It meant only that it had been faced once more. The victory was real, but it was never permanent. In this belief, there was no single triumph that solved the problem of existence. There was only the daily labor of keeping the world from slipping back into disorder. For this reason, the people of Egypt lived as participants, not spectators. At first light, temple doors opened with familiar sounds of stone and wood. Incense burned, its smoke rising slowly, curling upward, as if it remembered the path it had always taken. Hymns were spoken carefully, not as performance, but as maintenance. Offerings were placed before sacred images, not because the gods required food, but because attention itself was believed to nourish the order of the world. These were quiet acts, repeated by steady hands, meant to strengthen what held existence together. Outside the temples, the same responsibility continued. A fair measure in the marketplace, an honest judgment in a dispute, a clean home swept before evening, a restrained tongue held back from cruelty. These were not small things. They were threads, and a world woven from threads could unravel if enough were ignored. To forget this was dangerous, not because the gods demanded praise, but because the land itself taught the lesson relentlessly. The river could bless, and the river could destroy. Floods could rise too high or fail to arrive at all. Drought could follow arrogance just as easily as misfortune. In a country sustained by a single ribbon of water, harmony was not poetry. It was survival. And yet, there was comfort in this understanding. If darkness returned each night, it didn't mean the world was cursed. It meant the world was alive, moving through a cycle that required vigilance rather than despair. Existence was never promised. It was earned. And what was earned could be honoured. So the conflict between unmaking and balance did not end with a single verdict or a final judgment. It continued quietly, woven into storms and seasons, into the unseen labour of the gods, and into the choices made in kitchens, courtrooms, and fields. The world endured not because it was flawless, but because it was held, day after day, breath after breath, within, a fragile order that had to be renewed with every rising sun. Among Egypt's many gods, there was one who did not announce himself with fire or thunder. He didn't carve his presence into the sky, nor did he demand attention through conquest or spectacle. While other gods declared themselves through visible acts, this one remained unseen, felt rather than displayed, present without insisting on being noticed. This was Amun, the hidden one. From the beginning, Amun was defined not by shape or story, but by what could not be grasped. He was associated with breath, the movement of air that sustained life without ever showing itself. He was motion without visibility, power without form. While other gods ruled clear domains, the sky, the river, the dead, Amun belonged to what lay behind them all, moving through every place without being bound to any. In his earliest worship, Amun was quiet and local. He was a god of Thebes, honoured without grandeur, overshadowed by older creator gods whose myths were already ancient. He had no great battle to his name, no dramatic moment of creation carved into legend. And yet, this absence was not weakness. It was the source of his strength. Amun did not claim to be everything. He allowed the universe to exist without explanation. As Egypt changed, Amun changed with it. When political power shifted south and Thebes rose in influence, its hidden god rose alongside it. Kings sought a divine authority that could not be challenged by borders, lineage, or tradition, a power that did not belong to one city or one image. Amun offered exactly that. He was already everywhere. He simply had not been spoken of loudly before. Rather than overthrowing older gods, Amun absorbed them. When joined with Ra, the visible sun god, he became Amun-Ra, hidden essence joined with revealed light. Ra was the sun that could be seen crossing the sky. Amun was the force that made that journey possible. Creation was no longer only an act remembered in myth. It became an ongoing process, sustained by something unseen working beneath the surface of all things. This union reshaped Egyptian thought. Divinity was no longer defined only by form or image, but by transcendence. Amun could not be fully depicted. His true nature was said to be unknowable. Hymns praised him as the god who existed before names were spoken, who created without appearing, whose power could be felt everywhere but measured nowhere. This made him absolute. What could not be fully known could not be fully resisted. Amun did not rule through command or fear. He ruled through inevitability. As belief in Amun spread, his priesthood grew powerful. The temples of Karnak rose slowly, stone by stone, expanding into vast complexes that were not only places of worship but centers of authority. Wealth flowed into their halls. Land was dedicated in his name. Armies marched beneath his blessing. The hidden god now shaped Egypt through institutions, guiding the nation without ever standing visibly at its head. Pharaohs embraced this power. They claimed not merely to serve Amun, but to be chosen by him. Victory was explained as his favor, defeat as his withdrawal. Amun became the unseen presence behind the throne, granting legitimacy without occupying it, ruling without appearing to rule. Yet Amun was not only a god of kings. To ordinary people, he was closer than any crown or temple wall. He was believed to hear prayers, spoken in silence, the quiet pleas of the poor, the wronged, the forgotten. He required no elaborate ritual, no costly offering. A whispered appeal was enough. He was known as the one who comes at the cry of the oppressed. His justice was subtle. Amun did not promise immediate reward or swift punishment. His power worked slowly, invisibly, shaping outcomes over time. In a world where chaos often seemed louder than fairness, this belief offered quiet reassurance. Imbalance was seen, even when it was not corrected at once. Through Amun, Maat gained a deeper foundation. Order was no longer sustained only by visible cycles like the rising sun or by ritual repeated each day. It was upheld by a hidden principle that moved through everything, a balance that could not be forced, only maintained. Amun guided events without spectacle, reminding gods and humans alike that harmony depended as much on humility as on action. But hidden power carried danger. As Amun's priesthood grew, wealthier, their influence rivaled that of kings. Authority shifted quietly into sacred hands. The god who could not be seen became the center of visible control. Balance began to strain. In response, one pharaoh attempted the unthinkable. Akhenaten rejected Amun and elevated Atea, the visible solar disk, as the sole truth. Mystery was replaced with certainty. What could not be seen was cast aside in favor of what stood openly in the light. Temples closed. Names were erased. For a brief moment, Egypt stood beneath a single blinding sun. The experiment failed. Aten offered clarity but no depth. Without mystery, humility vanished. Order collapsed under its own rigidity. After Akhenaten's death, Amun returned, stronger than before. His temples reopened. His name was reclaimed. The attempt to erase the hidden had only proven how necessary it was. Amun endured. He did not replace the older gods. He stood behind them. He was the breath within Shu, the strength within Ra, the authority behind kings. When balance trembled, it was Amun's unseen presence that steadied the world. And when temples fell silent and prayer ceased, Amun did not disappear. For how could the hidden ever be destroyed? He remained where he had always been. Unseen, unnamed, yet everywhere, waiting within the quiet space where order is born. Beyond the great myths spoken in public, Egypt was believed to hold quieter truths, truths that were never shouted into the sunlit courtyards or sung aloud during crowded festivals. These stories lived elsewhere. They waited in shadowed halls, where stone absorbed sound and voices lowered on instinct, where torchlight slid carefully across carved walls instead of flooding them. These were the hidden myths. They were not meant to replace the great stories of creation and order. They did not argue with them or seek to stand above them. Instead, they deepened what was already known. Like roots beneath a tree, unseen yet essential, these mysteries held the visible world steady. To encounter them was not simply to hear a story. It was to accept responsibility for carrying its meaning with care. Within these secret traditions, the gods themselves were understood to be layered beings. Many lived more than one life. A deity who appeared gentle in one myth could be fierce in another, not because the stories conflicted, but because power was never simple. The Egyptians believed that force revealed different faces depending on time, place, and purpose. What seemed contradictory on the surface became complete when viewed in full. Magic moved through these mysteries as quietly as breath. Words were not treated as symbols alone. They were actions. To speak correctly was to align oneself with the structure of the universe. Spells were not commands forced upon reality, but acts of cooperation with it. Careful negotiations between human intent and cosmic order. A name spoken at the right moment, a sign carved with steady hands. These acts were believed to restore balance rather than disrupt it. Symbols carry the same weight. A carved image was not decoration. It was presence made durable. Hieroglyphs were understood as living forms, shaped with intention and endurance. When written or carved, they did more than record meaning, they sustained it. A word spoken aloud faded into air, but a word cut into stone repeated itself endlessly, long after the voice that first uttered it had fallen silent. Power endured through form. Sacred animals moved quietly within this hidden language. The ibis, the falcon, the cat, the crocodile, each was revered not merely for its body but for the principle it embodied. In their instincts, Egyptians saw order acting without hesitation or doubt. Animals did not debate balance, they lived it. Nature itself became a teacher, revealing truths that words could approach, but never fully contain. These mysteries were guarded with care. Priests did not reveal sacred knowledge all at once. Initiation unfolded slowly, layer by layer, ensuring that understanding grew alongside discipline. Sacred spaces were designed to reshape awareness. As one moved inward, Corridors narrowed and ceilings lowered. Footsteps echoed briefly, then softened, swallowed by stone. The air grew cooler, heavier with incense, and even breath seemed to slow. Light thinned into shadow. Sound faded. With each step, the ordinary world fell away, replaced by a deliberate listening stillness. Silence itself became instruction. Not all knowledge needed to be spoken in order to be understood. Some truths gained strength only through restraint. To hold meaning without displaying it was an act of balance in itself. Mystery preserved reverence, and reverence protected order from carelessness and excess. Through these hidden traditions, mythology remained alive. It was not rigid or frozen, but breathing, adapting across generations without losing its shape. These stories did not demand explanation. They invited reflection. They offered depth instead of certainty. Those who entered the inner sanctuaries were reminded that truth was not always visible, and wisdom was rarely loud. In this way, Maat was protected not only by ritual, but by humility. Balance survived because some knowledge was withheld, not to exclude, but to preserve harmony. What was revealed too easily risked being handled without care, and as these mysteries rested beneath the surface of belief, they prepared to rise into the visible world. Stone would soon carry what voices could not. Walls and pillars would hold what memory alone could not protect. Myth was ready to become form. In Egypt, myth was never meant to fade with memory alone. Stories were not trusted to voices, because voices could fall silent. Instead, belief was given weight. It was pressed into stone, carved into walls, and lifted toward the sky so that order could remain visible even as generations passed. Architecture and art were not created merely to impress the eye. They were acts of preservation, deliberate attempts to hold the structure of the universe in place when time itself began to erode memory. Temples were built as models of the cosmos. Their design followed the logic of creation. From open courtyards flooded with sunlight and sound, one moved slowly inward, step by measured step, into darker, quieter spaces. Sandaled feet crossed stone worn smooth by ritual. Voices lowered, light narrowed. This inward journey mirrored the movement from the visible world into the hidden depths where creation was first believed to have taken shape. At the heart of the temple stood the sanctuary, small, shadowed, and still. Dust hung faintly in narrow beams of light, drifting through the silence. Stone floors felt cool beneath bare feet, worn smooth by centuries of devotion. Here, the god's presence was thought to dwell, unseen, yet unmistakably real. This movement through space was intentional. It trained the body as much as the mind. Noise was left behind. Light faded, sound softened until even breath felt loud. The world narrowed until attention itself became an offering. To enter a temple was not simply to arrive somewhere. It was to be reshaped, to reenact the slow movement from chaos toward order with every step. Nothing inside these spaces was accidental. Columns rose like bundled reeds, recalling the marshes where life had once pushed upward from the waters of Nun. Ceilings were painted with stars turning stone into sky. Floors carried the weight of the earth beneath all things. Walls bore reliefs of gods, kings, and rituals locked into careful symmetry. In these spaces, worship was not only devotion, it was repetition, a reenactment of cosmic balance performed again and again so that harmony would not be forgotten. Rituals within the temples were believed to sustain the universe itself. Food placed before statues was not symbolic alone. It was nourishment. Hymns spoken at dawn strengthened the sun's journey. Silence, observed with discipline, preserved harmony. The temple was not meant for crowds or spectacle. It was a working engine of order, maintained quietly, day after day, beneath the surface of ordinary life. The pyramids spoke a different language. They were not built for the living, but for eternity. Rising sharply from the desert, their shape echoed the first mound of land said to have emerged from the primordial waters of Nun. Each pyramid stood as a fixed point between earth and sky, anchoring the pharaoh's soul to the heavens. Their geometry expressed refusal, a refusal to bend, to decay, to surrender to time. Inside their sealed chambers, rulers prepared for their final journey. Walls were carved with sacred words, names, and spells, early forms of what would later become the pyramid texts. These inscriptions were not decoration. They were instructions, protections, and assurances meant to guide the king through the Duat and secure his rebirth among the stars. Every word was placed with care. A mistake could mean disorientation. Precision preserved order. These structures declared that death was not an ending. Stone preserved what time threatened to erase. Names, identities, and stories were held in form so they could endure within the eternal cycle. To be remembered was to continue. To be carved into stone was to resist chaos itself. As belief evolved, so did its written form. Sacred texts once reserved for kings alone gradually expanded beyond the pyramid walls. The coffin texts carried protective words into the tombs of nobles. Later still, the Book of the Dead placed guidance into the hands of ordinary people. Eternity widened. What had once belonged only to rulers became accessible to many. Hieroglyphs carried this purpose further than any spoken word could. They were not simply writing, they were living images filled with intention. To carve a symbol was to give it presence. Spoken words faded into air, but words cut into stone remained, repeating their power endlessly. Names preserved identity. Spells guarded the soul. Prayers endured long after the voice that first spoke them had fallen silent. To erase a name was to destroy a future. This belief shaped how monuments were built and protected. Memory was not passive, it was active, powerful, and essential. Without remembrance, order weakened. Art followed the same discipline. Figures were shown not as they appeared in a fleeting moment, but as they were meant to exist forever. Bodies were balanced. Faces remained calm. Gestures were deliberate. This was not a lack of creativity. It was devotion to stability. Through repetition and symmetry, art affirmed that the world, though fragile, could still be held together. Scenes of gods, rituals, farming, judgment, and celebration covered walls and tombs. Daily life itself was carved into eternity, suggesting that ordinary acts, when aligned with Maat, were worthy of preservation. Myth became visible, durable, present. In this way, Egypt turned belief into landscape. Stone became memory, architecture became ritual, art became theology. Even as cities fell silent and ceremonies ceased, stone remained. Temples and carvings continued to face the sun, holding the memory of creation, balance, and endurance. Myth did not vanish. It hardened, it waited. Long after the last great temples fell quiet, the myths of Egypt did not vanish. They did not end with the closing of shrine doors or the silence of abandoned altars. Instead, they loosened themselves from the banks of the Nile and began to drift outward, carried by travelers, merchants, soldiers, and scholars, people who came to the river and left altered by what they'd seen. The stories did not always survive whole. Names shifted, faces changed, images were bent to fit new tongues and new lands, yet something essential remained. Not a single god or ritual, but an atmosphere, a way of seeing the universe as alive, structured, and full of consequence. Greek visitors stood among monuments that already felt ancient, even to them. Stone towers rose from the sand like memories too heavy to move. They listened as priests spoke of divine balance and the weighing of the heart. They watched rituals timed not by clocks, but by sunrise and flood, by rhythms older than their own cities. They did not simply borrow Egyptian gods and rename them. They absorbed deeper ideas. That order was fragile, that the soul was accountable, that time didn't run straight but turned, returned, and repeated. The Romans followed, and the movement continued. Across the empire, Isis appeared in new places, her worship carried far from her homeland. Shrines rose in ports heavy with salt air, and in distant towns shaped by foreign stone. Her face was adapted to unfamiliar eyes. Her symbols blended with local customs, yet her presence endured. She remained a figure of devotion and protection, speaking softly to those who felt the world could be harsh, unstable, and unforgiving. Egyptian symbols travelled too. The Ankh, the sacred eye, the image of judgment and the promise of renewal. They entered new languages and new beliefs without losing their old weight. Even as new religions reshaped the spiritual landscape, Egypt's questions did not disappear. What makes a life honest? What keeps the world from breaking apart? And after the final breath, what remains? These were not only Egyptian questions, they were human ones. And Egypt had offered answers with unusual patience. Answers built from cycles rather than conclusions, from balance rather than certainty, from endurance rather than final victory. For a long time, the land itself seemed to hide what it had once proclaimed. Sand gathered, temples collapsed into silence, roofs fell inward, reliefs cracked, hieroglyphs became sealed doors, unreadable to the world that followed. The gods appeared to fade into the past, as if they had finally been swallowed by time and forgotten beneath its weight. But silence was never the same as erasure. When stone rose again into light, when inscriptions were studied, when carved figures were examined with new attention, the old stories returned. Not as living religion for most, but as living imagination. Artists, writers, and thinkers found themselves drawn to Egypt's calm severity and its quiet tenderness, a universe where darkness was faced nightly, where justice mattered beyond the grave, where order was something you maintained, not something you assumed. What endured was not only spectacle, but a mood, a sense that existence is delicate, that meaning must be tended, that chaos is never fully gone, and yet life continues, again and again, because something within the world insists on return. In this way, Egyptian mythology remained what it had always been, not a collection of tales meant merely to entertain, but a lens through which the world could be watched more carefully. A reminder that harmony is an act, that memory is a form of protection, that creation is not only behind us, but beside us, present wherever light follows darkness, wherever balance is chosen instead of neglect. And so the long shadow of Egypt stretched forward, quiet and persistent. Its gods no longer received daily offerings in the inner rooms of temples, yet their patterns remained, moving beneath later stories, shaping later dreams, lingering like the afterglow of a sun that has slipped below the horizon. The light fades, but the warmth stays. The world grows softer, slower, and still. The sun rises again. It always does. Light spreads slowly across the land, touching stone and water and skin, just as it has since the first morning, since order first lifted itself from the silent waters. Shadows pull back without protest. The river catches the light and carries it forward. Birds stir. Life answers the day. Nothing rushes. Nothing truly ends. The world continues, not because it is invincible, but because balance, once shaped, has been tended. Chaos was never erased. It has always waited at the edges, in darkness, in uncertainty, in the places where attention fades. It pressed close in every age, patient and unseen, and yet, again and again, order held, not through conquest, not through domination. It held through care, through memory, through the quiet labor of choosing balance, one day at a time. The gods themselves did not remain unchanged. Their temples grew silent. Incense no longer rose at dawn. Hymns faded from daily use. Their names slipped from living. Worship into story, symbol and stone. They no longer walked openly beneath the sun, nor did they receive offerings from every household. And yet, they did not vanish. They endured in another form, as memory, as meaning, as patterns etched into art, ritual and belief. Stories remained when voices fell away. They lingered in the rhythm of the sun's journey, in the idea that life does not end with death, in the conviction that justice matters because it echoes beyond a single lifetime. These stories did not demand faith. They did not threaten. They offered perspective, a way of seeing the universe as delicate, alive, and worthy of care. Egypt endured not because it conquered without limit, but because it remembered. It remembered creation rising from chaos. It remembered the wound of betrayal and the patience required to heal it. It remembered that order was never permanent, and that responsibility did not belong to gods alone. It belonged to everyone who lived beneath the open sky and depended on the river's mercy. Even now, the Nile continues its course. It carries silt and memory together just as it always has. The land shifts, cities rise and fall, the world moves forward, yet the ancient vision remains, quiet, steady, unbroken, resting beneath change rather than resisting it. Empires collapse, names fade, stone erodes, but the stories of Egypt continue. They flow onward like the river itself, altered by time, shaped by distance, yet never truly severed. Eternal not because they are untouched, but because they continue to return.